Good afternoon. We'll get going in just a second. Okay, so good afternoon. Good afternoon, Elizabeth. How are you? Good to see everybody here. It's a very interesting afternoon, but it's hot. It was actually warm. I don't know when it's start time to put the air conditioner on, but pretty soon, I think. Interesting day in the markets. I actually had a very good day in the market. For some reason, I'm picking contrarian stocks. So I'm not sure what that is, but if you're watching our finance page, you're seeing that obviously I'm in Viacom, and I about last week said taking positions in Palantir and in Ford, and all those have been up since that time. So if you're watching along with that, you're free to join and watch what we're doing. Again, I'm not giving financial advice. I'm just explaining why I may buy or not buy something, what I'm looking at, some basics of financial literacy, and I'll be expanding that into more videos in the very near future. I'm sorry, my voice is a little shot for some reason. So an interesting day. This is more kind of, I guess there was a sell-off at the end of the day, so both the Dow and NASDAQ were down. But more than anything else, what I had today on the agenda was this idea that we are, as a state, going to be paying $1,000 for people to go back to work. And to those that have watched this podcast for some time, certainly the first two stimulus packages is very much for. The second one, we agree with giving money to the lower classes for a simple premise of they spend it. People who don't make a lot of money, when they have money in their hand, while we'd like to encourage them to save, rarely do. They actually spend. And a good economy is based on the movement of money. So when people are spending money, that's a good thing. That said, we now have a problem where this additional $300, whether you believe that's the sole reason or not, it is certainly a part of the reason that many, many businesses cannot get people to come back to work. I know every restaurant along the shoreline is desperate for work. I know restaurants that have paid fees, finder's fees to get people to work. It is a serious problem. Manufacturing especially, and these are jobs that are $15 to $18 an hour that cannot get filled. These are jobs that have been filled in the past. People exist to work there. They cannot fill these jobs. And at that number, even at $20 an hour, $20 an hour is $800 a week. I'm sorry, is that right? $20 an hour times 40 is what? $800 a week. 65% of that is what? $550 or so, plus the 300 is $850. There's no reason for somebody who was making even $20 an hour on unemployment to hurry back. And as a state, we got rid of, as part of these packages and part of the pandemic, the requirement that people apply for new jobs to maintain their unemployment. So we're not returning that, but Governor Lamont mentioned yesterday that he's going to pay the first 10,000 people who apply for a full-time job, get a full-time job, and hold it for 8 weeks, will get a $1,000 bonus. We're now paying people to go back to work. Now, there are states in the country that have taken the opposite approach and said just eliminate the $300. That's happening there. Connecticut, leaning significantly more liberal, doesn't want to do that. So however you feel about that is up to you. The fact of the matter is it's basically an acknowledgement that we have a problem and we are not getting people going back to work. This idea that the people who are not working or that there's not enough jobs or they have a reason not to work, clearly the government's saying, wait a minute, we know we have people sitting home. We know we have people that are not working. We know we can't get people out their door to work. And they're now paying them to do so. So we have a lot of interesting things happening in the job force, and this discussion over what people should be paid, inflation, wages will be ongoing for quite some time. And so that brought up the question in a conversation that I had yesterday with somebody else. And also today I saw some interesting statements on social media on this concept of a living wage. And large corporations should pay more, and then these millions of people should be, these huge corporations with billions of dollars in profit should pay more, and these CEOs make millions of dollars and they should give it back. And before I go further, Amy, you have a problem with people working under the table and collecting? That is incredibly, waitresses, construction workers, whatever, who are working under the table and are also getting unemployment. Yes, that's happening. But that's not addressing the problem of so many restaurants that simply cannot find bodies. And that's in those industries, that's always kind of been the issue. So yes, there's a lot of people, but in general, those are the lowest people on the income totem pole. So yeah, it's wrong. I'm not going to go too crazy on that group of people. The way the stimulus is set up right now, there is no incentive for people that make up to about $21, $22 an hour to go back to work. And the nicer it gets outside, the weather plays a role, the nicer it gets, the less likely people want to go to work. In fact, that $21, $22 is where it levels off. I think there's many people who would say, even at $25, can I take a free $800 on unemployment and not get them to stay home, and even a 10, 15% reduction in pay? I mean, hard to get them to stop when they're making double the income. And not only restaurant, all the types of jobs such as construction. It's absolutely construction. That's completely true. Okay, so this concept of a living wage, and we hear this all the time. We talk about political bumper stickers, and we yell about this stuff all the time. But the question that I have is, how do we identify a living wage? What is it? And so, interestingly, if you were to Google what is a living wage, something interesting comes up. And something from MIT comes up. It's called livingwage.mit.edu. Counties, and then you have, I'm going to go to the regular page first. You can collect your state. So if you want to go to this, you can, livingwage.mit.edu. And you see that page there, and you can type in your location. So I'm going to type in, we're going to start with Connecticut. And we'll type in, and you go to your counties. You have New Haven County. And they have determined that there are certain hourly wages that have to be paid to reach certain status levels. So in Connecticut, the minimum wage is $12 an hour. Actually, this has gone up since then. I believe it's 13, but whatever the case is, it's going to 15. But let's just say it's 12 for the first quarter of this year. Somebody living in poverty, one person, no kids, would be making $6.13 an hour. So minimum wage, they're over poverty. A living wage for one person living alone, is $16.21 an hour. Living wage for somebody with a child, one adult, one child, is $32.94 an hour. With 2 children, $41 an hour. With 3 children, $53 an hour. So one adult with 3 children, they need to take in $53 an hour. And what does that work out to be? $2,000 a week to pay bills, and apparently have an apartment with 4 bedrooms or what have you. 2 adults working with no children, $25.66 is a living wage, and 2 adults both working, the living wage would be $12.83. So it's an interesting breakdown. They go through, there's a whole list here of food costs and childcare costs and medical costs and housing costs and all of these other issues that they have come to these conclusions on what a living wage is, what poverty is, and then also what minimum wage is and where that gets us. So I'm left with a significant question. How do we determine, and I'm somebody who obviously lived in home. I lived in New York City for a year at 19 with 2 roommates. I lived in I lived in Derby with 2 roommates shortly. West Haven alone, I've lived alone since I was, 23 or something like that. How do we determine the lifestyle that someone has to have a living wage? When someone's 19 and they want to move out of their parents' house and they want an apartment, is a living wage them living alone, having a car payment, having an entertainment budget? Is that a living wage? How do we determine how much money someone should be able to buy for a car or a nicer house or a nicer apartment? What is living wage? What is not? And then the question is, what role does society have in covering what someone considers to be their personal living wage? And so as we see people push for a $15 minimum wage or an $18 minimum wage or a $20, whatever it is the minimum wage they're pushing for, they're throwing around this concept of we need companies to pay a living wage. The truth of the matter is the vast majority of large corporations pay more than $15 an hour. For example, the biggest advocate for a $15 minimum wage nationally, guess what company? Amazon. Why? One, they do it already, right? There's no question. They pay a significant amount. They paid $18 to $20 during the pandemic. They had hazard pay. They had more. The problem is when we start getting into these minimum wages, who gets hurt the most? Small business. The people who pay the price the most is small business. If you don't think so, not long ago there was a pharmacy in the center of town owned by a local resident. It's gone. Can't compete with CVS and Walgreens and Costco and Walmart. If you think that, if you go a little further, go to Walmart, buy a can of cat food, and then go to Karen's Corner and buy a can of cat food. It's drastically different. Large corporations love high minimum wages because it destroys their small competition. The small stores get crushed. And so this question that we yell politically, we need a living wage, we need a minimum wage, we need it higher, needs far more discussion than we're actually having. It cannot be a bumper sticker conversation. It cannot be a national wage because the cost of living is significantly different. Now let's go back to that chart. If you open that living wage calculator, again, livingwage.mit.edu, and we went to New Haven County, and we saw that a living wage for a single person, well, let's take an example. A living wage for 2 adults and 2 children, each person would have to make $22.41 an hour. So essentially we could double that. We'll say $44.41 an hour. Let's go back to the starting page, and we'll use Alabama as an example. And I don't know what county, there's 1,000 freaking counties here. I'm going to just go to Dale County because I have no idea. And it's significantly less. Instead of $22 an adult per hour, it's $13.95 an adult per hour. So if we start passing national minimum wages, someone in Alabama will make far, far more than someone in Connecticut because each wage is not equal. The cost of living in Alabama is significantly less than it is here. And that brings us to another question. When we talk about a living wage, does everybody have the right to live everywhere? Should everybody be allowed to live anywhere they want? Or should they find a place that matches them? If someone chooses to go to school to be a doctor or to be something that's going to pay a lot more money, or someone chooses to go to school to make something that they know is going to be less money, are they responsible for that decision? Or should they be able to live anywhere? If I choose to live, instead of working in finance, doing a podcast and covering local news, which, here's a newsflash for you, significantly less money than I can make otherwise, should I also be allowed to live in Greenwich? If I can't afford my own place and I could only have a roommate, is that not a livable wage? And so the question I come back to all of these political activists is, how do you define this? And what role does personal decisions play in what society or government has to do to cover that? If I've chosen at a young age to save money and invest and work and get educated, and now I'm making $200,000 a year, or I've chosen not to do any of those things, and I can't manage to live without a roommate or two, and I'm having a 15-year-old car, is it a livable wage? Is it the job of the government to mandate that corporations pay us that amount of money? And what happens to small business when you start mandating they pay a certain amount of money? Go to the diner and ask the owner of the diner if they had to pay $15 an hour for their employees, what the cost of goods would happen, what the cost of a cheeseburger would be, just fries would be, or a shake or a soda, or whatever it is. It would go up significantly. And in some businesses, it doesn't matter, right? So if you're going to buy a new iPhone for $600 and it goes up to $650, you're probably still buying the same iPhone. But if you want to go buy a burger for $5 and it goes up to $5.80, eventually you may buy less burgers. And if that continues to go up, you'll buy less and less and less. The corporations that can keep the price the same and not pass on that expense to you are large. So a large corporation like Chili's, you ever wonder how Chili's food is so inexpensive? They have buying power no one else does. They can pay more money, but the local restaurant can't. So these laws have impacts that destroy small business. That's not Democratic or Republican. That's just economics. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a minimum wage. I'm saying this idea that we throw blanket statements out there as we have to have a living wage, or that it doesn't really have a definition. It's just in the cloud somewhere. And it means something drastically different based on where you live and even what county you live in. Let's go back to that chart. I'm going to pull it up again. We did Alabama and Connecticut, but we did New Haven County, Connecticut. Let's go back to Connecticut, and we'll do a different county. What's the, I don't know, Tolland? What's the lowest cost of living county? So Tolland, a living wage for 2 adults with 2 children is $21.66. Children, I should say. New London County, $21.14. Windham County, $20.51. Litchfield County, $22.05. So even within Connecticut, these are different numbers. $22.22 in Middlesex. New Haven County, we said $22.41. And imagine Fairfield County would be $25.09. So you have a $5 difference for the highest 25. You have a 20% difference in cost that adults need to make per hour to get whatever this standard of living is supposed to be, a livable wage is supposed to be. You cannot have a blanket number. This idea that you can yell out corporations have to pay more without understanding what the repercussions of that are is a problem. That's political bumper sticker posturing nonsense. It doesn't actually have, it doesn't help our discussion in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't help the political discourse. And so how will we solve the problem? You can have minimum wage set to the standard of living in that state or that district, but then somebody might just go to a different place that makes more money. The issue with this is it's far more complicated than the Facebook posts and the bumper sticker stuff that we see on a regular basis. And so when we look at the last stimulus package and we said, wait a minute, we have to pass this, we need it. And Republicans said, hold on a second, we don't want to pay them for that long. There's a reason for that. You couldn't get staff back there. When people said, hold on a second, let's not pay a national $15, let's find more. And by the way, some Democrats as well, that made sense. You can tell the ones that understood business. It's one thing to throw money at the problem, but now we have other problems. People won't go back to work. Inflation is something that was looking us in the face. And now we have another package, almost $4 trillion, that Biden is talking about transportation. Some of these may be great ideas, but there are repercussions for these ideas. We have to fully understand what those repercussions are. I want to read some of these comments because I'm not sure what's going on here. Living wage didn't learn a skill. Listen, part of that social contract, and we talked about this yesterday, is you have to keep bettering yourself. Now, if you want to just flip burgers at McDonald's, you can do that, but then you also can't complain that you're not making the money you want to make. Is it society's job to make sure you can afford a new car and a new house based on a McDonald's salary? I don't think so. You have some obligation to take care of that yourself as well. You have some obligation to say, I want to put some effort forth and go further. Elizabeth, I read that at the end of May, you will now have to show that you have been looking for work in order to collect unemployment. I hope that's true. I don't believe that's true in Connecticut yet. So maybe nationally they said something like that. In Connecticut, it's just $1,000. But at some point, that should be the case. The problem with that, Elizabeth, is that we don't have the staff in place to start mandating that and looking through all these applications. There's too many people on unemployment. The unemployment department was hit hard during this pandemic. That's why there was delay for a lot of people getting paid. Then asking them to do that, it may be too soon to do that. Minimum wages for high school kids, retirees, and second income. So I will tell you this. I've heard that many times, and there is some truth to that. The minimum wage wasn't necessarily meant to be a full-time living wage. And that's why the people that you're yelling at politically are saying we want a living wage, not necessarily a minimum wage, right? We want to pay a living wage. So they may be referring to 18 or 20 or $24 an hour, whatever that is. Here's the problem that we have with corporations. So some corporations like Costco was ahead of the game, right? They paid more early on. They were the Democratic darling. Hillary was having book signings there. And I think it actually made a lot of sense. They paid their people more. They had less turnover. By the way, turnover in employees is incredibly expensive. They pay people more to keep them there. They probably saved money in the long run by paying people a little bit more, paying them benefits. Makes sense. But then you get a corporation like Walmart. And Walmart pays minimum wage. And the truth of the matter is the vast majority of the people who work at, maybe not the vast majority, but many of the people who work at Walmart, many tend to be older and are also getting many other government benefits. So here's the other side of this. If the minimum wage Walmart is paying puts them at a level where they can qualify for government benefits and still qualify for, Husky or the government health care plan in Connecticut, that means we get to subsidize Walmart's profits. The taxpayers get to subsidize Walmart's profits. Now, to a certain extent, we subsidize a lot, right? We pay for roads, we pay for police, we pay for fire. All of those help a business thrive. But if that employee is not making enough money to pay for their own health care or not getting health care benefits, if they're not making enough money to avoid food stamps, that means we as taxpayers are now subsidizing the bottom line of that corporation. So in some companies like Amazon, that may not be the case. But if you have a single mother with 2 or 3 kids working at Amazon, that may be. When you have somebody paying the bare minimum and there's a large percentage of their employees that are making just enough to still qualify for benefits, or what a lot of these corporations will do is they won't give them a full-time job. Because they don't want to get them to healthcare, they give them 25 hours a week, 30 hours a week to keep below certain thresholds, only pay them a certain amount of money. So that person working that job either has to have a second job or is on government assistance. There are serious issues we have to address. What we want to get away from are the bumper sticker politics of a living wage and not knowing what that is. Companies like Walmart, yeah, they feed off of the government willing to give benefits to people making under a certain amount of money. And they can do that by paying them a small amount, the minimum amount, or keeping their hours under a certain amount. So their take-home pay is less than enough to get off of government benefits. So yes, to a certain extent, we have a serious problem in that regard. And that's people who are in careers. Not everybody's going to have a degree, right? There are people who may not be able to get past being a cashier at Walmart. That's okay. But if we are still subsidizing from the government and you're making money off that, we have a problem. So that's something we have to address in some way. Christina, you're absolutely correct, Steve. I'm not sure what that was referenced to, but thank you. Amy, as a small business owner of 23 years, I've created jobs and paid into unemployment for 23 years. But if I can't make it, I do not qualify for unemployment. Why is that? I've never understood that. So that's absolutely correct. In this pandemic, they changed that. They allowed self-employed people to get unemployment, but you do not qualify for unemployment. I'll also say this, as someone who consults with many small businesses and owns a small business and has had employees. If you've never run a business and you're a politician, I will always be a little skeptical of you. You do not know what it's like, the stress level you have, what goes on, the sleep you lose when you have a payroll due, wondering how it's going to get paid. The stress of hoping one client pays you by Wednesday so it clears by Thursday so you can cover payroll by Friday is a very real stress that small business owners have on a regular, especially early on a regular basis. Those first 3 or 4 years of business, most small business owners won't make a dime. They'll never make a penny. Yet they pay payroll, they pay healthcare, they have all those expenses. So this idea of business being evil or business corporations being evil and not paying a living wage, understand first what a small business owner actually does. And understand when you go to that diner or that small grocery store and say you now have to pay $15 an hour, what it does to the cost of their goods, what they have to do to make that money. It's significantly higher. significantly. And I want to tell you this, do this. Go to Walmart today and buy a can of cat food, and go to Karen's Corner and buy a can of cat food. It's probably double. So now go to Karen's Corner and say, I want you to pay your people $3 more an hour. And say, how do you even compete then? Because, I'll go to Karen's Corner in a pinch. I don't go there on a regular basis. Most of my cat food I buy in bulk over at Walmart. In a pinch late at night of Karen's Corner, I go to Cumberland Farms because my cat will just, eat me alive if he doesn't get food by 4 o'clock in the morning, whatever. But that's a very real problem. When we yell this political stuff, we want a living wage, we want minimum wage, there are very real impacts to very real businesses. And we have seen in the center of town businesses that were there, locally owned, that are gone because of that. That's real. And that business owner who pays unemployment, by the way, your unemployment match, which was 15%. So employers paid an unemployment tax on the first 15% or $15,000, I'm sorry, of earnings for an employee. The new law is that's going to be up to $25,000. So employers are not going to have a new tax to cover the unemployment that we've kind of gone through all through this pandemic, but going forward, they're not going to qualify for that unemployment. That's true. If you're an employee, here's a little newsflash for you. The amount of money you make, add about 25 to 30% to that, because that's what the employer actually pays you. You don't get that check, but in taxes and matching taxes, they have to pay. When that employer takes money, they have to pay double those taxes because they have to pay for the employer and the employee. There are so many fees that people don't realize as a small business owner. And so when I see elected officials yelling these political talking points, it's a huge, just eye roll moment. Or people, quite frankly, that have always been in a union, spend their life in a union. No concept of what real healthcare costs out here. Healthcare for me, I'm a single person. I'm 43 years old. Over $600 a month with a $12,000 deductible. I'm sorry, that was wrong. No, I had it wrong. $6,000 a month with a $6,000 deductible. So I'm $13,000 a year to get a checkup. God help you if you're a family. Elizabeth, replying to Christina, minimum wage is never meant to be for high school kids. Look up what FDR said what the minimum wage should be. FDR's quote was good. We should not be just a bare minimum of existence. There should be more than that. We understand that. That was either minimum wage or living wage. Which is a very different conversation there. And we can decide if over the last 40 or 50 years from FDR, longer than that, I'm sorry, if the definition of minimum wage should be a living wage or not. Those are two very different things. We do have, and hopefully we will always have, jobs for kids. What's happening is instead of giving jobs to adults for full-time jobs, we're giving that job to kids for 20 hours a week. That's what's happening on a regular basis. Companies are avoiding the laws to avoid having to pay, because at some point, a burger can only cost what a burger can cost. Can't charge $20 for a burger. And if you're a McDonald's, you definitely can't, because you're competing with Wendy's and Burger King, and you have serious competition going on at the same time. There are repercussions for these decisions. Responding to Amy, something with me too. Own my business for 30 plus years. Can't click on unemployment, but paid into it for 30 years. Regarding corporations, I would prefer to see the tax loopholes closed and regulations put in place that prevent them from cutting staff without first eliminating executive bonuses. Okay, so let's talk about executive bonuses. This is what we refer to as a talent drain, right? So when the crash happened in 2008, there was a huge push to buy out, to help corporations, right? And it caused a big backlash. But there was a massive push to help corporations. Part of the stipulations the government was going to put on the money they gave to banks like J.P. Morgan. This was after, what was the bank that died? The first bank that went bankrupt. Bear Stearns? No, it was the next one. Whatever it was. After that happened, the government needed to put liquidity in the markets, and they were forcing many companies didn't need the money, to accept this money. And along with that stipulation, they were going to put that their executive compensation couldn't be over a certain amount of money. All those corporations fought back against that. because once you are at a disadvantage in attracting top talent, you would just be at a major disadvantage. I mean, think about it in terms of if we suddenly went to 3 or 4 teams in the NBA and said, Lehman Brothers, you're right. I'm sorry about that. Good. If we went to a couple teams in baseball or basketball and said you could only pay the top people a certain amount of money, it would give a massive advantage to every other team. The same thing was happening there. So if you start saying, you have to tie in when employees make to the CEO or what have you, you will start limiting the people that will come to that company. And quite frankly, the high-level CEOs that are really good, they're really good. And some of them are very much worth what they're paid because they get it back for their shareholders. For those complaining that corporations aren't paying enough in salary, you need to go and check your 401k and check your retirement accounts and make sure those companies are in your retirement accounts first. Because those dividends that it pays and those stock advances that it pays and those big gains that it's paying, it's coming from not paying those employees a lot more money. You see the cycle here? Is Walmart in your portfolio? Probably. Is Home Depot in your portfolio? Probably. Is Amazon in your portfolio? I'm quite sure of it. Some mutual fund. So you can yell and scream that they should pay more, but you are a beneficiary of them not paying more. And then if you start limiting what you can pay a CEO, that company has less options to go out and get a quality CEO, and they're at a disadvantage when it comes to competing for those with other ones. Michael, my point was to eliminate the execs from raking in the cash while they cut staff to make the bottom lines look nice. That happens. Yeah, and part of AT&T announced that they are buying up Discovery Channel. You know what that means? A lot of people are going to lose their job. And the head of Discovery Channel is going to make a fortune. Head of AT&T is kind of an idiot, but the head of Discovery Channel is going to make a fortune. When AT&T bought Time Warner, which is just an awful deal, the head of Time Warner made a fortune. It cost a lot of jobs. When you start mixing companies together, there's a synergy and you lose a lot of positions. That happens. Laying people off to hit numbers, they do that on a regular basis. And quite frankly, you're right. Some of their bonuses are tied to the amount of money they make. If you go to a really good example of this is Home Depot. Home Depot, after Jack Welch left GE, he had to choose who his new CEO was going to be. And the person he took over just left a little while ago, and he wasn't a very good CEO. But Bob Nardelli, I think, was in line to get that job and didn't get it at GE, and instead he went to Home Depot. Now, I happened to work at Home Depot when he was hired, and Home Depot was the place, and you can attest to this, most people can attest to this, had like plumbers in the plumbing aisle, an electrician in the electrical aisle, and the kitchen designer in the kitchen department. And they had people that worked at their front registers from the beginning that were retiring millionaires. They had paid extremely well. They had staff there. It was a great place to go. Nardelli went and basically got rid of all the good people and replaced them with, schmucks, like just some guy in the plumbing aisle. Paid less, a lot less. A few years later, the owner of Home Depot, Arthur Blank, came back and said, no, screw that. We're not destroying our reputation. And they made the change and they got rid of him. But he left with tens of millions of dollars as part of his compensation. The stock went crazy. But that's what happens in corporate America. It's a decision that was made. Because those stock owners are owners of the company. The CEO answers to those owners. So the whole point of this conversation, and when I started making notes an hour ago as I was going through this, is that this is far more complicated than the bumper sticker. It's far more complicated than just pay a living wage. First, what is a living wage? Where is a living wage? What obligation does society and government have to make up for your decision making? If you choose to live alone in a nice apartment and have a new car, is that a living wage? If you choose to have a roommate and keep a used car, is that a living wage? If you choose to be single and have 4 kids, is that a living wage? If you choose to be married and not have any kids, is that a living wage? What is it? And what level does personal decisions have in deciding what minimum wage should be or a living wage should be that the rest of society should make up for? That's the question we have to ask. Just a few more of these comments. Amy, I was in the center and left my office, which I tried to rent and couldn't, and sold the building. But yes, if I have to pay higher wages, there will be less people I can employ and less benefits I can give. Yeah, and so what people don't understand about business is part of this is what people are willing to pay for a cheeseburger. If people suddenly say, listen, go pay your people more, I'll pay $30 for a cheeseburger, they'll pay the people more. They don't have to make more money. If you're moving bigger amounts of money around and you're still making the same amount, most business owners are okay with that. But you still have to have demand for your products. That's just how it works. Health insurance cost is insanely high. I have Christian healthcare since the exchange makes no sense to have. The problem with those Christian healthcares is they're often basically just emergency healthcare plans. Just be careful. I think there are some laws being discussed about some of those plans. I'm not sure. Single mom, 2 kids, and my kids are on Husky now, but I was paying $600 per month for me and $800 for my kids before it broke me. And Amy, I'm not sure what the deductible would have been there, but I'm sure you had one. Exactly, Christina. If we can't make it after paying in and creating jobs for decades, we get nothing. Lehman Brothers. My point was to eliminate the execs from raking in the cash. I call that runaway capitalism or runaway capitalism, and that may be the case. At the end of the end of the day, the job of the CEO is to bring value to his shareholders. That's his job. That's it. And if he doesn't do that, he will lose his job. That's how this works. At the end of the day, however, that value that he brings to his shareholders, who are the shareholders? Yeah, I buy a couple hundred shares of stock. The people who buy millions of shares of stock, your retirement plan, your 401k, union pension plan. Those are the big players. Those are the people who are really making the money on that corporation, not paying more money than you think they should to their employees. All right, that's my kind of rant for today. It was just a topic that came up, and we are getting it's a tougher time because we don't have summer usually slows down. The state thing is going to wrap up pretty soon. We'll talk about some of those laws in the next week or so. But it's a slower time. If there are questions or comments or topics you'd like me to discuss, I'd be glad to hear suggestions on those. That being said, it is beautiful outside. I hope you get outside. Enjoy the week. I will be back on tomorrow at 4 o'clock. I hope you have